All right, we are starting with lesson 11.8, and we are talking about equal parts. So on this first page here, it's crossed off, you don't have to do it. So now on page 748, at the top, it says the green rectangle is the whole, and of course ours is in black and white, but this is what they're talking about. The green rectangle is the whole, and it can be divided into equal parts. And then below it says there are two halves, each part is a half, so 2 equal parts there. The next part says there are 3 thirds, each part is a third. The next one says there are 4 fourths, each part is a fourth. So when we talk about equal parts, the key word there is equal. So we have to make sure that all the pieces that make up that whole are the same size. They have to be equal to be considered halves, thirds, or fourths. So I'm going to kind of do an example here with some paper. So I have this sheet of paper here. It's a rectangle shape, and this is my whole shape. It's the whole thing right here. So now, let's say I take my sheet of paper and I'm going to cut it in half, all right? And I want to make my paper into halves or 2 equal parts. So I need to make sure that they are the same size. So I went from my whole, and then I cut them into 2 equal pieces, so they're the exact same size. I'll show you, same size. So we could say that these are halves. These are cut into 2 equal parts, so these are halves. Now, let's say I had my whole, and I cut it like this. So now look, I have 2 parts, but they are not equal, so they cannot be considered halves. For something to be halves, which is 2 equal parts, thirds, which is 3 equal parts, or fourths, which is 4 equal parts, all the pieces have to be the same. So as you can see, this is a whole right here. When I cut it apart, it's 2 pieces, but they're not equal, so they cannot be considered halves. But on this one, I had my whole, I cut it exactly in half, so these are equal parts. They can be considered halves. All right, so it's very important that our pieces today, if we were to actually cut out these shapes when it asks us to show halves, thirds, or fourths, if we actually cut them out and laid them on top of each other, they'd all have to be the same to be considered halves, thirds, or fourths. Okay, so back to your packet here. We're still on page 748. Down below, it says, write how many equal parts there are in the whole, and then write halves, thirds, or fourths to name the equal parts. So our first shape here, we see that there are 2 equal parts. If we were to cut these, they are the exact same shape. There's 2 of them, 1, 2, so we'd write 2 equal parts here. And we know anytime there are 2 equal parts, that would be considered halves. So right up in your directions, it tells you how to write halves, so you'd write halves on the line here. Our next one, we see this shape is split into 3 equal parts, so we'd write 3 equal parts. And then we know anything that's split into 3 equal parts is it would be called a third or thirds, so we'd write thirds on the line. And then we'll look at number 3 here. This circle is cut into 4 equal parts, so we'd write 4 equal parts, and we know anything that's cut into 4 equal parts would be called fourths, so we'd write fourths on the line. And then that's what you're going to do for 4, 5, and 6 as well. Then you're going to turn the page. You're going to be on page 749. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are all the same as what we just did. So you'll count how many equal parts there are and then write if they are halves, thirds, or fourths. And then 13 says, draw to show halves. Explain how you know that the parts are halves. So they give you this, I think it's a rectangle. I don't think it's quite got all the same length sides, so we'll call it a rectangle. All right, you need to show halves. So you are going to take your pencil and you are going to actually split this shape, whether you want to call it a rectangle or square, to show halves. So I drew, pretend these are like the same shape you have on your paper there for number 13. So I want to talk about a couple ways we could make halves. So we could go straight down the middle, like that. We could go straight across, like that. But if we went like this would not be considered halves. Yes, it's two pieces, but are the pieces the same size? Are they equal? They are not. So this one down here, how we cross that off, would not be considered halves. All right, on to page 750. So you do not need to do number 14, and you're going to go down here to number 15. And it says, draw lines to show fourths 3 different ways. So on this square you'll show fourths, on this square you'll show fourths, and on this square you will show fourths. And you're going to show, so all of them are going to be fourths, but you're going to show it 3 different ways. Now, explain how you know that the parts are fourths. We know something is always going to be a half or halves if there are 2 equal parts. So for something to be called thirds, there would be 3 equal parts. So we know that those 3 squares are going to be considered fourths because there are 4 equal parts. So once again, remember, when you're explaining how you know if something's halves, thirds, or fourths, you have to explain that they are equal parts, and then it's just however many parts it takes to make that half, third, or fourth. All right, and then we will go on to page 751. This is your assignment page here. 1, 2, and 3, you're telling me how many equal parts, and then if they are halves, thirds, or fourths. Number 4, it says sort the shapes. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw an X on the shapes that do not show equal parts. So remember, equal parts just means they have to all be the same. If you were to cut them out and lay them on top of each other, they were all the same shape. So if any of these in here, if you were to do that, would not be equal parts, you draw an X on them. Then the next part says, circle the shapes that show halves. So any shape in here that shows halves, you'll circle. So yes, there might be some other ones that show thirds or fourths because they have equal parts, but they do not want you to circle anything but the halves. And remember, halves are when you have 2 equal parts to a shape. And then number 5 at the bottom is crossed out. Go on to the back side of that one. You are on page 752. Number 1 up here says, what are the 3 equal parts of the shape called? So if something's divided into 3 equal parts, what do we call it? And over here, what is something called if it is divided into 4 equal parts? Remember, you can always go back to that first page, the back of that first page we did, and it explains when you have 2 equal parts, 3 equal parts, and 4 equal parts, what we call those. Or just actually on the front of this page too. It'll tell you how to spell them up in the directions. Number 3, we're going way back here. What is the sum? You are stacking and adding 2-digit numbers. And over here, what is the difference? So you are subtracting 2-digit numbers. And down here, circle the quadrilateral. Remember, a quadrilateral has 4 sides. And number 6 says, circle the hexagon. Remember our trick for remembering hexagon? It has an X in it, just like the number 6. So that means a hexagon, you're circling the shape that has 6 sides. And then that is 11.8.